Lots of other headlines to get across as well. Of course, we'll talk to Tony Abbott, we'll talk to Moira Adeyemi, and a whole lot more. We'll cross to Jerusalem, speak with Rita Panahi. But to get across the headlines, I'm joined now by Daily Telegraph journalist James Willis and Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Welcome to you both. I've got to start again with this issue of the Prime Minister and lack of leadership, growing anti-Semitism in Australia. It took him days and days to call out that act of terrorism in Melbourne. He took 4 days then to get to the synagogue. We've obviously had what I thought was a change in his rhetoric, certainly in how he appeared yesterday, Nick Cater. But then overnight, yet again, we've got a fresh blow to the Jewish community in Australia. We have voted against Israel, and the Prime Minister wants Jews to believe he's on their side. Nick, I just think he's a hollow man, and this is about votes in Western Sydney and kowtowing to the Greens.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought his comments were heartfelt yesterday in response to the violence there, or the attacks in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. But look, this just, it just puts the kibosh on it, doesn't it? Because we know that an unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, without seeking to disarm Hamas or without insisting on the release of the hostages, that's a victory for Hamas. That's a victory for the terrorists. And the notion that the Albanese government seems to be pursuing, that we can have a two-state solution, get real. The biggest obstacle to a two-state solution right now is Iran and its proxies. And like the United States under Trump, we need to be focusing on Iran and not getting caught up with these desperate cries for a peace in Gaza. That's not the issue. The issue is dealing with the bigger players that are getting in the way of a truly peaceful solution in that region.
James, today the PM stood with the PNG Prime Minister James Marape. He announced $600 million for an NRL club up that way. Considering where we are in Australia with these anti-Semitic attacks on the rise, cost of living pressures, all the other grim statistics in terms of our budget and more, I just thought that, look, $600 million to a foreign country for a footy team, it just looked and sounded tone deaf to me.
Well, Peter, I think there's no doubt that the Prime Minister was certainly keen for a distraction after a disastrous last week, and to go into a rugby league field and be discussing this major announcement, something that, in fairness, has been in the works for quite some time, but it was certainly a good distraction away from some of the negative headlines he's had in the last few days. Look, it's a really interesting deal because Peter Dutton has made a very sensible point today that he largely supports the idea of doing more with PNG, and he thinks it's a very important strategic step. But this kind of money over 10 years, whether it be for rugby league, whether it be for anything, deserves proper scrutiny and auditing. We give a lot of money to PNG already. I think most Australians would have absolutely no idea where it goes. It certainly, in fairness, and very sadly, doesn't go to improve their standard of living in places like Port Moresby. But this money is ultimately seen as a very strategic step. There's apparently a China clause, which means that if PNG does a deal with China anytime in the next 10 years, the whole thing can be ripped up. Reading the comments today, there's a lot of rugby league fans that are a little bit doubtful about how it's all going to work. I think there's a lot to work out here. They're going to have to convince players to live in PNG. They're talking about tax-free salaries. They're going to have to build them a giant compound. There's no issue with fans. PNG's got a massive rugby league audience. But I'm very keen, like Peter Dutton, to understand where this money over the next 10 years actually goes. But certainly for rugby league, and Peter Volandi's the boss, they've played a blinder because it's money in the bank and they get another team as a result, which is better for their broadcast deal.